Hi, good afternoon, everyone. Hi, I'm Aditya, Jayam, Prabhakar, Director of Resource Assessment and Planning at the California ISO. In the interest of time, I said we'll save my bio, we jump right into the material. The idea of my presentation is to talk about understanding resource adequacy in our balancing authority area today and tomorrow. For those of you that are not familiar with the CAISO system, BA operates about 80% of California's electricity demand is managed by the California ISO. This is our footprint in bright orange on the left. Our resource mix is comprised of predominantly 32% of natural gas. We have a couple of nuclear units, a lot of solar, wind, and battery storage resources. So more than 50% of our installed capacity is comprised of variable energy resources and energy storage combined. We have a peak load, observed peak load of 52,000 seen in 2022. This is a pictorial representation of what resource availability is over a 24-hour period. Also called as a slice of day in terms of if you've heard that frame. But if you look at this, it's 24 hours across on the x-axis and different resources stacked up and their availability. So this is your natural gas. It's fully available every hour. Nuclear is too. Hydro is based on hydro conditions, so that's also available that way. You see this wind, you have other renewables, then you have your solar in the middle of the day. The dashed line is your peak load, and the dark line is your peak load plus 80% reserve margin. So it's basically trying to say, do we have enough resources above the peak load every hour and based on their resource production capabilities? Right? And then on the very top, you see your energy storage, battery storage resources that are dispatched. Our risk hours are typically after the gross peak hour into the net hours before the night. So we see a lot of that dispatch is, the battery storage dispatch happens during those 5-6 hours, basically. Another thing is we are well to the system, so we have a lot of imports coming in, but during the net peak hours, we cap it at 5,500 megawatts of total imports coming into the system. So you have about 11,000 is the transmission import limit, about 500 megawatts is what is assumed to be available during the net peak hours. So the dotted line over here is trying to say, for all of that battery dispatch to be available in the net peak hours, it should have opportunity to charge during the day, right? So during the solar peak hours, we allow for battery charging in this pictorial representation to get a quick look at the fleet's characteristics and capabilities on a peak day for each month. So while we oversee the resource adequacy program in the CAISO BAA, we rely heavily on the various local regulatory authorities that we have in our system. The California Public Utility Commission is one of the 28 local regulatory authorities, or LRAs in short, and they have their own reserve margin requirement, and that's about 90% of the California ISO load. So when you have different resource adequacy programs in these LRAs, each LRA has its own counting rules. So my team tries to operationalize all of this and brings it together in the month ahead time space. So T minus 45, we get all of these different supply plans, if you will, from all of these LSCs, each LSC trying to meet their local regulatory authorities' requirements, applying their own counting rules, and brings it together. So we at the ISO have to understand what is the fleet's reliability that is provided overall. So for anybody that does not have a counting rule for accrediting these resources, we basically have something called as default counting rules that has that was adopted back in 2006 and never been updated. So that's one thing that we are trying to update, and I will talk about that in a little bit. So as the system is changing, as you saw, more than 50% of our fleet is solar, wind, and storage, and anticipated to become more and more of that kind of fleet characteristics. You really need to understand the system resource capabilities, resource attributes, and also how do you accredit these resources and how do you count for resource adequacy. Right. So we are working with all of the LRAs to understand their capacity is procured and how it is shown to us, the different mechanisms thereof. And we're also looking at how to update our modeling and defaults. So we have historically been doing plexus modeling at the ISO for many, many years. We are trying to figure out how to make improvements to that zonal model representation that we have and incorporate all of the latest things that are happening in Plexus version 11. So we are doing a lot of modeling improvements there and coming up with methodologies to improve our defaults. After a lot of stakeholder discussions and hearing from experts, there were like 4 different proposals, if you will, of how you count these resources that came into being categorized here. So for like proposal 1, it's basically, it's trying to account for these resources based on expected output, right? So thermal resources, and storage, it's basically the availability of resources in at-risk hours. If the at-risk hours, the 5 hours that you define, or is it in the hours where LOLE was observed in the model. So whatever that definition is, availability of resources during those hours is what the first proposal was trying to look at. Hydro wanted ELCC based on expected hydro because we have about 9,000, 10,000 megawatts of hydro in our system. It's very dependent on snowfall and water hydrological conditions in our state. So then these values change annually was the idea. And then for wind and solar, we wanted average ELCC values applied on a monthly basis. So it's not a single value for the entire year, but you get monthly because our program at the ISO is a monthly RA construct. So the proposal 2 is basically average ELCCs for all resources. Proposal 3 was doesn't matter the resource type, you only look at its availability in the at-risk hours and then do an average and come up with a marginal ELCC there. Proposal 4 was mimicking more on the slice of day kinds of requirements that we have that I showed you earlier. So basically you have 24 slices. For each slice, the resource is worth a particular amount. UCAP adjusted D-rates for thermal resources, and for wind and solar and hydro, you have exceedance values. Exceedance basically what is the 70%, 90% depending on the month and the year and the type of resource. You come up with 70% exceedance percentile values looking at last 5 years of production data. So that's peak day program. So we are trying to explore all of these different things because now we have an ability to come up with something that's a clean slate for how you accredit these resources. These are only for informational purposes because that's every LSC defaults to their own local regulatory authorities' requirements, basically. So our Plexus model design is a little different. Compared to the other frameworks that we have seen. Ours is more in the resource adequacy modeling space. This is our framework that we use in our summer assessment as well. So because our fleet is hydro, wind, solar, storage, all weather dependent, all dependent on other parameters, so we really have 500 unique sets of profiles for each of the load, solar, wind, based on historical variances. So you have randomized profiles. Each profile is random. So you get all of this solar, wind, and load. You have a set of outage profiles based on history. You have your hydro conditions Also, in each of the 500 cases, the distribution of hydro representation also reflects the historical variability that we've seen over the last 25 years. So a profile set of 1 of 500 picks one load shape, one solar shape, one wind shape, one hydro condition, and one set of outage profiles, and collects it and runs plexes. So we basically are trying to come up with that dispatch. 8760, we look at loss of load events. We have a set of conditions that it has to meet. And then once we get through all of that, we look at red there is trying to mimic the unserved energy requirements in the system. So we do all that calculations to understand the magnitude, the duration, and the frequency of the loss of load. And then we go into the iterating and the standard ELCC process there. So then it's talking more about how you do the study year. When you do current year, do the 5th year, 10th year, 15th year, you basically do resource by resource at a time. You go for each month. You have to calculate those values. We are trying to come up with automation tools that are custom designed for being able to process the information from our 500 simulations. So a lot of that is happening. Right now, we basically try and divide the models into each monthly snapshot. So we have one model for each month, trying to stick with our monthly RA construct design. So we're doing all of that here. And so I'm told that we are the first ISO in North America that has licensed plexus. So we've been using it for over 2 decades. Not myself, but my predecessors. It's helping us to understand and prepare for fleet evolution. Our primary use case of plexus at the ISO is to assess the summer conditions, upcoming summer conditions. So we do a thorough analysis using existing fleet and expected fleet, and conduct a detailed analysis to get a sense for how our summer conditions are going to look like for the current year. That report will be published early next month. We are also using it for default rules and PRM development that I mentioned earlier. And the other aspect that we want to get into is to assess the resource attributes going into the future. So the graph on the right-hand corner is basically showing you that in 2025, sometime thereof, all of the newer kind of resources that we did not have, your wind, solar storage, is going to be more than your traditional thermal resources. So when you have more of that kinds of resources, it comes with a different set of performance characteristics, availability, and attributes. So we're trying to assess, does the system have the right kind of attributes available for every hour in the day throughout the year to ensure reliability. Our lens is more of the reliability lens, while we rely on our regulatory partners like the Public Utility Commission and the Energy Commission for various go into this the modeling framework. The other aspect that we look at is the potential retirement of these gas resources, which has served as a fuel that allows us to navigate the net peak hours, because when your solar dies, you suddenly need a 3-hour ramp is very high, and that gas resources played that part. And so when you see in the future what happens, resources that will complementing and providing that services. So understanding that is where we will be using more of that plexus models, maybe do it for 4 months, for 5, 10, 15 years out, portfolios that we expect to be seeing in our system in the future, and really dive deep to understand all of that aspects and come up with insights that we will then go and work with our regulatory partners and the state to make sure we go energy transition in a reliable manner.